Welcome back to Dungeon Master's Corner. Today, we're exploring the use and abuse of a specific spell and the repercussions that follow. Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of the Dungeon Master's Corner. My name is Brian.
And I'm Nicole.
And today we are talking about one of our favorite spells and just how useful and just how precise it is.
Yeah, there's so much that you can do with it. We're talking about Dimension Door.
And specifically, we're talking about Menowin's experience with Dimension Door.
So just to recap, Menowin was my desert elf evocation wizard from our Prince of the Apocalypse game. Talked about her a few times, and I love her dearly. But dear God, I don't think I ever really used Dimension Door properly once. I mean, the spell worked and got me from point A to point B, but
It's just a matter of what point B was. Now, real quick, Dimension Door reads a very particular way, and I was the DM, and I said, fuck that way. Earlier in the game, we're going to go into a lot more detail on this one. I actually don't remember if I talked about this in Henry's Hat Trick or not.
I think we talked about it in Womford Burns, is where it came up.
Well, no, not that one.
Oh.
Before Womford Burns. So, there was an instance with Henry and a spellcaster, and we'll get into detail on that another time. But he pissed the spellcaster off. She grabbed him and Dimension Doored off the top of a tower and let go of him to send him into freefall. Now, I know that's not how the spell works, but for the drama of it, I gave Henry a saving throw. He Henry'd it. And so he's now plummeting over 1,000 feet to the ground. We'll tell you about that one another time, but that is how I allowed Dimension Door to work. You can take a willing creature, no problem. You can take an unwilling creature if they fail a wisdom save against your spell DC. So, Menowin, having seen me do this before, utilizes that ruling again in the future.
And we talked about it in Womford Burns, where I Dimension Doored myself and the Werebore Vega onto shore because I wanted to drop a fireball on him and not burn our ship that we were on.
She wanted to 1v1 the Werebore.
Which in retrospect was a very bad idea.
It went how you expected.
It did. It did indeed. But Dimension Door worked, and I was able to bring him with me. Success! Kind of.
Crit!
Yep.
Dead wizard.
Unconscious wizard.
Well, downed wizard. Yeah, you weren't dead, but you might as well have been.
Yep.
Thankfully, the Werebore went on a rampage through Womford instead of...
He found more interesting prey to occupy him, but...
living prey.
If you Dimension Door with an enemy, make sure that either your allies can get to you, or you can actually withstand your hits from him.
Which, as we discussed with your hit points, was unlikely with anything higher leveled than a goblin. And even then, I'm not sure.
Thanks. The second time I used it, we were in Tomoa-chan, actually. Henry had gotten lured into a lake by some sort of like mermaid siren creature. And, he needed some backup. And Menowin was not the strongest of swimmers.
Or the strongest of anything.
So I utilized Dimension Door to get me to him.
My favorite part was the getting him out of there portion where you realize that as a desert elf, you never learned to swim.
Yeah, it was a fun little bit there.
Revelation.
The getting out was not easy. And I absolutely earned the lecture from Thehaman afterwards. Like, yeah, totally. I'm just that good at swimming.
And he called your bullshit immediately.
Oh, yeah.
Because again, desert elf. What did you learn to swim in?
I didn't.
Although I think the best had to be... Was that also in Tomoe-chan? When you...
It was also in Tomoe-chan. That's where it happened.
So there was a door, and anyone who's ever played D&D or watched a actual play D&D knows the greatest enemy any player can face is a locked door.
Doors are the worst.
It took 3 spells. I feel like we overdid it. Really? Because it took 3 spells. Well, you did it in less than 3 spells.
I did it in 1.
Did it in 1. And you took Theomin along for the ride.
Yeah, because it was after the mermaid thing, and he told me that I'm not supposed to mention Dora alone again.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you asked him if he trusted you. And there was a long pause on that one. Which was also well-deserved, considering.
So we dimensioned door to the other side, and Brian, the DM, asked me, so how far in do you go? And I'm like scratching my head. I'm like, I don't know how thick this door is. So I'm just going to guess a certain amount of feet.
I took out the map. I had it laid out on the table. I'm looking at it. I'm like, tell me exactly where you go. As if you're on a grid. Tell me the number of squares.
I think I said 10 feet is what it was.
Yeah, I think you went 10 feet because you're like, the room could be 10 feet big. 15 feet I could hit a wall. 10 is safe, right? No one's going to put anything 10 feet in, right?
And the door can't be that thick.
Yeah, so 10 feet in, there was a pillar. So she literally dimension doored both her and Theomin into a pillar.
So we both started freaking out a little bit. A lot.
Taking damage. Force damage, if I was correct on that one.
Yeah. And then somebody started speaking in tongues. Multiple tongues.
At once. It was fun.
That was terrifying. So we're stuck in a pillar, and the paladin boyfriend, who is currently an Oathbreaker and questioning his gods and goddesses, starts speaking in multiple tongues and pressing for a decision to be made.
Now, real quick background here on Theomin. We've mentioned him before, and how he'd been shanghaied into this campaign. Well, I'm not going to give you an NPC for free.
No.
You're going to get them, and they're going to either have some kind of tragic backstory or burden. In my Forgotten Realms, the Temple of Mystra had a strict line between paladins and clerics. The clerics were the knowledge clerics for the most part, and they could study the arcane, but paladins were forbidden from learning anything about arcane magic. And Theomin, whose father was actually the head of the paladins in that order, dabbling in wizardry was flagrantly breaking that rule. And he had to decide, do you want to continue being with the paladins of Mystra, or do you want to continue this foray into magic? And he was torn. Do I stay with Mystra? Do I break my oath? Do I find another god or goddess who will allow me to utilize these gifts I have as a paladin and my magical interests? And as that decision kept getting put off, I kept adding more and more burden until this gift was handed to me.
I think there was some evil god that was contending for him as well, because the holy symbol had gone like completely black. Like Mystra didn't feel like an option at the time.
Yeah, Mystra was not really an option at that time because he had turned his back on her, and now it was I forget who the evil god was, because spoiler, he chose the good one.
Because I think the question was, what do we fight for?
Right, and you had to answer that question. It would determine what god got possession of his soul.
You know, no pressure or anything while we're stuck in the pillar.
While you're stuck in the pillar, slowly dying, and if you didn't make a choice and he went down, the evil god was going to take him regardless. So you had to come up with an answer that satisfied the good god.
I said we fight for for good, right? Like we fight for our friends. And Pillar explodes as the good god takes over.
I think it was a little more than just fight for our friends. Saturday morning cartoon special. You gave it a good.
I did.
This was years ago, so we apologize for not being able to do this verbatim. But there was a solid like speech almost, like one of those inspiring leader kind of speeches.
Mm-hmm.
The pillar exploded, damaging them more, of course, because stone exploding around them and through them. But the good god took over, and for a little bit of flavor, I loved the idea of Elestri, the sword maiden, the drow, the only good drow goddess, good aligned drow goddess, who is also known as the sword maiden. So the whole, blade singer, elvish sword fighter who follows magic, it made a lot more sense with her.
Fits so well. It was so poetic.
It also made you put a giant statue of a naked woman in your mansion. So
yes, it did. So my boyfriend could worship his goddess. I also got to meet her, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, it's fun when your boyfriend goes into the other room to get on his knees for another naked woman. A different naked elf. This is the kind of stuff I do to my players, just to just get another dig in there. And also, I am a huge fan of Elestri. Elestri is a really cool goddess.
She really is.
She does not get the spotlight she deserves, and to be fair, it probably does have to do with the whole dancing naked in the moonlight thing that, D&D, Hasbro, they're trying to aim for more of a child-friendly audience. You don't want to have that on the cover of a book. Or do you?
I mean, it's art.
D&D After Dark. It's art. It's just going to be one of those, we can't put this with the role-playing games kind of books. Which is a real shame, because there's so many cool gods. That was probably my favorite thing about this whole thing with Thayaman. We're going on a completely different tangent from
the Dimension Door.
From Dimension Door.
We could always talk about the gods at a different time, too.
That is true. It just gave me a lot of time to research them, so that was fun. Just one wayward spell can put you down a rabbit hole of information.
Oh, yes. In a good way.
In a good way, yeah. It's always fun to try and dig through this stuff. But anyway,
be careful where you Dimension Door?
Well, that's from you. I'm trying to think, as the DM, did I learn anything from your constant misuse of this spell? Because it wasn't even just be careful where you Dimension Door, because you did Dimension Door yourself into a solid object, but you also brought yourself onto the shore. Now, I said this a million times to her, after the fact, of course. If you're going to take a werebore off of a ship, why did you Dimension Door laterally when you could have Dimension Doored vertically? And I'm pretty sure you had Featherfall or something.
I did not, actually, because that wasn't something I had taken yet.
I thought you had something that could have helped you.
I didn't think about fall damage at the time.
That was my very first. As soon as she's like, Dimension Door, I'm like, brilliant! Dimension Door him up over the water, so when he hits it, it's like fucking concrete. Brilliant. Onto the beach, 500 feet away. Less brilliant.
I also didn't just want to outright kill his character.
Meh.
It's a lot of fall damage.
It's a lot. He was a werebore. They dropped to 1. To be fair, I think the lesson I learned there is don't assume your players are going to do what you think they're going to do. Not even how normally that advice is given, but a plan was being laid out in front of me, and I started filling in the blanks and taking the next steps in those plans as if I was the player. Don't. Turn your brain off and listen. And then once you have the whole plan, react to it. It's one of the things I have to learn and do better at is reacting rather than, anticipating. But I believe that is all we have time for today, so thank you for joining us for another Dungeon Master's Corner. I have been Brian.
And I've been Nicole.
We hope to see you on our next episode, and until then, bye!
Bye!
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Dungeon Master's Corner. If you'd like to support us, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Reliably Chaotic and help us fund our new book, Tasteful Nudes of Gods. It's not pornographic if it's art. You can also drop us a line on Twitter at Reliably Chaotic. We'd love to hear from you.